thumbs up or something like that, just to let me know you can see them. There's a 2-minute sign and then a time's up sign. On a time's up sign, just try and wrap up the point that you're on, generally speaking, if we get to there. Okay, so fantastic. Our next speaker is Ailish Gallimore, who is a Newcastle University undergraduate student, and her talk today is going to focus on looking at exploring the relationship between mental fatigue, stress appraisals, and anger in competitive sport athletes. So whenever you're ready, Ailish, over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Ailish. I'm currently in my final year studying psychology at Newcastle University, and I'm going to be discussing the findings of my dissertation project titled Exploring the Relationship Between Mental Fatigue, Stress Appraisals and Anger in Competitive Athletes. So the main variable under focus within this research was anger. Anger is often experienced within sport in the context of competition and has been linked with both positive and negative performance outcomes. This dual effect on performance has been explained in 2 key ways. The first relates to anger's influence on arousal, which can both support and disturb the task execution process, relating to differential outcomes on performance. And the second can be explained by Lazarus's 1991 cognitive motivational relational theory. Lazarus's theory describes the relationship between stress and emotions in athletes. The theory proposes that when athletes identify a stressor in their environment, and this is a stimulus that has the potential to cause stress, they'll make a primary appraisal to evaluate if the stressor is personally relevant. This is either of threat, challenge, harm, or benefit. They'll then make a secondary appraisal to evaluate their ability to cope with the stressor. And it's the primary appraisals of threat and challenge that were focused on in this study. Jones et al. In 2009 proposed a theory of challenge and threat states in athletes to explore these further. The theory proposes that challenge and threat are motivational states that reflect how an individual engages in a personally meaningful situation and includes cognitive, affective, and physiological components. The aspect of this theory that I would like to draw your attention to, and that has informed much of this research, is that challenge appraisals are typically associated with positive emotions, while threat appraisals are typically associated with negative emotions, such as anger. And this theory has received a plethora of empirical support, such as that of Skinner and Brewer in 2004 and Uphill and Jones in 2007. So now that we've discussed stress and anger, another variable that may lead to the experience of anger is mental fatigue. Mental fatigue has been defined by Van Custom et al. As a psychobiological state caused by prolonged periods of cognitive demand and is often characterized by a combination of subjective, behavioral, and physiological manifestations, such as feelings of fatigue and a lack of energy. Mental fatigue has been linked with anger due to a lack of cognitive resources, resulting in weakened emotion regulation control. There are 3 suggested underlying mechanisms for this. The first is a reduced ability to engage in effortful reflective processing. The second is an increase in irritability, which can manifest as anger. And the third is a lack of impulse control. This study aimed to explore the relationship between mental fatigue, stress appraisals, and anger, and to investigate whether threat appraisals mediate the relationship between mental fatigue and anger. And the 3 hypotheses were mental fatigue, challenge appraisals, and threat appraisals would significantly predict changes in anger. Mental fatigue and threat appraisals will be significant positive predictors of anger, but challenge appraisals will not. And that threat appraisals will mediate the positive predictive relationship between mental fatigue and anger. The study followed a cross-sectional correlational design, recruiting 128 participants via volunteer and opportunity sampling. The majority of participants competed in either football, hockey, or netball at university or semi-professional level. The materials for the study consisted of 3 existing questionnaires. The first was a mental fatigue visual analog scale, which looks much like the one on the slide. Challenge and threat appraisals were measured using the challenge and threat and sport scale, and anger was measured using the sport emotion questionnaire. Prior to data collection, ethical approval for the study was granted by Newcastle University's Ethical Committee. The study questionnaire was shared with friends, family, and teammates of the researchers, as well as being posted on social media. The questionnaire was generated using the Qualtrics platform and consisted of an information sheet, an online consent form, demographic data, the 3 previously mentioned questionnaires, and a debrief. So the results. The descriptive statistics are shown here in Table 1 and show that all variables significantly correlated with each other, and each scale was reliable for the sample, as shown by Cronbach's alpha values in the brackets. The results of regression showed that the overall model was significant, with the predictor variables of mental fatigue, threat, challenge appraisals together explaining 9% of the variance observed in anger. However, of the 3 predictor variables, threat was the only significant positive predictor of anger. The results showed that mental fatigue did not significantly predict threat appraisals or anger as hypothesized. However, threat appraisals were found to significantly predict anger, supporting Jones et al.'s theory. The novel finding of this study is that threat appraisals significantly mediated the relationship between mental fatigue and anger, suggesting this is a complex relationship which is the product of a combination of variables. The findings of this study are valuable to sports psychologists and coaches as they have important implications for athlete performance. The findings can be used to inform intervention in 3 key ways. The first is teaching athletes to appraise the competition environment as challenging rather than threatening to lead to more positive outcomes for well-being and performance. This can be achieved through cognitive restructuring or imagery script. The second is to improve athletes' ability to cope with stress when appraising the environment as threatening. For example, if a coach or sports psychologist identifies an athlete who has a tendency to appraise stress as threatening, they can use coping self-efficacy training to aid the athlete's ability to cope in this situation. And the third is helping athletes to manage anger. As previously mentioned, anger can have both a positive and negative impact on performance. So through role play, athletes can learn to use this in a facilitative manner. Although the findings of this study have useful applied recommendations, the validity of these results are limited by some methodological issues. The first is the time at which participants completed the questionnaire, and this refers to how close the athlete completed the questionnaire in relation to their upcoming competition. As only 1 participant completed the study on the day they completed, there are likely to be validity issues. The second is the use of a visual analog scale without a definition of fatigue. Participants are likely to have different understandings of what mental fatigue is, and therefore the measure lacks construct validity. And the final limitation is the use of a cross-sectional design, as this means we cannot infer causation between variables. It is now recommended that a longitudinal study is conducted investigating the causal relationships between these variables. Additionally, research should now look at performance outcomes and how the variables impact performance to better applied to practice and intervention. And finally, it is important that the limitations identified within this study are addressed in any future research, such as the study being completed on the day of competition. So in summary, it was found that threat appraisals significantly mediate the relationship between mental fatigue and anger. This is a novel finding applying existing theory to anger and can be used to guide intervention within sports. Future research should now focus on the impact this has on performance. Thank you for listening, and here are my references.
Excellent work, Ailish. That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Is there any questions from the floor? Any hands, any questions? I have a question. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us the difference for people who don't know what the difference is between challenge and threat.
So a threat appraisal is when an individual decides that the stressor they've identified is personally relevant and can cause them harm. So they generally perceive the stress as damaging to themselves, whereas a challenge appraisal is more positive in the sense that they perceive the environment as difficult, but that they could receive a reward. So example, in competition, they kind of view that they could win. So that's kind of a positive spin, whereas in threat, they're more focus on the loss and how that could then damage their prospects as an athlete. And
then I might just ask a little follow-up as well, if that's okay, if nobody else minds. What does some of the research say about these 2 different types of appraisals? Is one better than the other, for instance? I mean, one sounds better than the other, but is that borne out in the research? Yeah, so typically the challenge appraisals are associated with, like I said, more positive emotions and more beneficial performance outcomes. And so that's why it's kind of been recommended that coaches and sports psychologists try to help their athletes to appraise stress as challenging over threatening, because it's more likely to have a benefit to them. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's very fascinating and some nice answers there as well to boot. Okay, that's us done for the student talks. Hopefully you found them interesting. We've now got a 10-minute break, which allows for a little bit of overflow and also setting up for the coach talks. I'm going to ask people to stay in the breakout room. So if your coach talk that you're interested in is in this breakout room, just stay in this one, or if it's in one of the other breakout rooms, hop into one of the other breakout rooms. Those coach talks will be starting at 5 minutes to 12. So you've got enough time to sort of stretch your legs, go to the toilet, and also get yourself a brew and a biscuit. But other than that, thank you very much for attending these student talks. Hope you found them interesting. And I will see you all in about 9 minutes or so.